Oh, you're on mute, Tom.
Can everyone see the screen? We are good to go. Uh, so the cover of today really is to look at this $1 trillion kids economy that is getting more and more talked about, and that's this incredible influence that kids are having across all categories. Really, we're actually, normally you'd see this and begin to consider that this just sits across maybe the apparel market or the toy market, but we're seeing this huge influence fall across all categories. So what I wanted to dive into is just let's look at the perspective and the scale, and I think we're all probably going to agree quite quickly, so we can accelerate through that section. That there's a fantastic opportunity that sits here. Then we really look heavily over the last 12 months around this attention economy and how we're all fighting for quite a limited amount of attention from the kids and the family space. We're going to look at how data can support those strategies, how partnerships can support those strategies. I'm sure, Simon, that's something you're quite heavily into. Uh, and then the big buzzword at the moment is what are we seeing around AI in this space? It's clearly having its uh, positive impacts across where it can be applied to data, but there's some watch outs as well. So I'll share and dig into some of those, and maybe we can see how any of us are utilizing more AI in our current business. So just a bit of a context and a background into us. Super quick. As I said, we capture in 22 different countries right now, covering a variety of categories from media usage, app usage, right through to food and drink preferences. We have a parent survey as well that begins to capture a parent's perspective and the parent's view. All of that for us gives us this fantastic real-time data view where every 45 seconds we're capturing a new voice somewhere in those 22 countries. So we're actively running in real time across those. It gives us these 5 generations as our data goes right down to 3 through to 30. And then also our parents is parents of children aged 1 through to 16. As it stands today, since we launched in 2017, we have captured data and insights and had conversations with over 3 million families, and that's growing every day. So as I share some of the data throughout this is what underpins our ability to advise and support our clients, and some of the points that I'm going to be sharing with you today. So let's look at this $1 trillion annual spend figure. It's a huge number. And really, what we look at this is, despite an audience that they don't even pay taxes yet, we don't believe that they have that much influence over spend. We're actually seeing that they make up around 20% of the current globe's population. And when we begin to look at some of our parents' data, the influence they have over decisions that sit away from that toys and game space is really quite interesting. Across our day, we say that 7 out of 10 parents are only saying that their kids are influencing their purchase decisions right now. I think if you looked at my household, I'd probably say that I'm not sure even I have three of those. I think I'm definitely all of my decisions get led by what my kids believe and want. But it's this significant amount of purchasing power that we're really seeing come through. As I say, when we look at those different sectors, this is the really interesting part that everyone already assumes that that's going on across media and across toys. But actually, groceries is a really interesting place that we're seeing vast growth across the influence there, where we're eating out and family holidays. So, Cheryl, and effectively for you, this is this huge kind of travel and tourism category that is beginning to have more and more of an influence. TV subscriptions is the huge obvious one with the drive that we see across streaming, and then also the technology that is held within the household now. We'll find that 61% of those have had influence by kids. We released an article that I'll circulate around the kids becoming the CEOs of the household is quite an interesting play on just the level of influence and impact they have. So probably something to circulate and share after this. Now, when we then take that information and we begin to look at the influence that a child is having and the standard funnels that we begin to look at to communicate and capture the attention or the interest of our audiences, we often then forget about kids or families or how they can really impact and drive that level of interaction. We look at I have this one. Where that influence we've seen grow is only getting bigger. So since 2021, we're seeing that increase has gone up by 21% of the influence that our kids are having across those purchases. And the big stat that has come out more recently is around the advertising space. So it's not a new concept that this is a growing um, the awareness of focusing and how do we communicate with kids and families is really beginning to grow and scale. So they believe that by 2031, the advertising market is going to surpass $20 billion. If we work backwards and begin to look at that, last year, end of last year, that sat at around $5.5 billion. And in 2021, it sat around about $2 billion. So you can see at the pace that this whole world of how do we capture that attention and the awareness of kids is hugely growing. Which brings us on to I guess the challenge that I see when I can communicate and when I sit and speak to our customers is if we're having this amount of spend that it will be flying into advertising, really we're moving into a world where everything is beginning to compete with everything. Everything sits in a digital world now, largely. But it's not just a case of competing within your own lanes. Simon, for you, I'm sure it's a case that you're not just going to be competing with other apparel companies. You're competing for a share of spend, but you're also competing to capture the attention of that child. It means you're also then competing with gaming. You're competing with the time that they spent throughout their lives. Cheryl, for you, I imagine it's not just about how do we compete with other experiences. It's how do we become that chosen experience to spend that time. We looked at what is available in a kid's life, and it begins to look like they spend over 40 hours on media, and we'll come on to that later. But the available time that is open to us for play is about 10 hours a week when you take out schools or nurseries and family time and eating and sleep and homework and everything else that goes on in a kid's life, and those segmented times that we know that there is family entertainment time. We're really all competing for quite a finite, focused amount that is available to us. And I think that Reed Hastings, this is a really interesting quote that always resonated with me and stays with me, that Netflix, they're not focused on what Disney Plus are doing or Amazon, but really where they see themselves competing is Fortnite is their bigger, is where they're losing that attention marker to. I think in another quote Reed had at one of his TED Talks, he felt their biggest competitor was actually people sleeping, because that was the biggest amount of time that you were comfortable allotting into your day. So when we try and think of breaking down the available time for attention, I think this really kind of helps bring that out onto life. I'm going to pause there and think, has anyone got any kind of questions so far around that kind of the capture of attention, where we're seeing that spend take place, or how we're seeing that evolve over categories? I'm happy to kind of dig in and answer any questions about it. No, no, I'll continue. So for me, when we begin to think around the busyness of a kid's life and this attention capture that is going on, it's really quite interesting to see how fandoms are then being built without borders. So it's not just local that becomes important or critical. But actually, we're seeing so many organizations now capitalize on having a global reach. Now, with the global reach comes how do you ensure that whilst the global reach, you have the right localized strategies to ensure that that you can capture that attention. But we're seeing that really kind of broaden across. And I'll share a few examples that we see with that. When we think about Pokemon, this great, fantastic, um, global organization, it was only recently in their LATAM market that they actually translated um, into LATAM-based Spanish. Prior to that, all cards and comms had always been translated just into European Spanish, which is obviously incredibly similar. But that local nuance actually was creating a lack of ability to capture that attention, and was actually creating a pretty negative brand feeling. So Pokemon have been a fantastic driver of being aware that they've got this digital landscape, but how do we really begin to consider and think about local nuances? So they began to launch local-based Pokemon things. So they built the Nacho Libre Pokemon, which I'm not sure if who is that fay with uh, wrestling, but that's the wrestling mask that you see. They produced a series of Pokemon with that to really try and consider how do they capture the attention of that local market. The other side of that is actually going the other way and considering whilst there are local strategies and organizations, how do we take that higher and how do we take that to be more of a global strategy and can that bring more global penetration? We're seeing that not just across this toy examples here, but even when we work with the sports organizations, and if you look at Arsenal right now, they're seeing it could be the Arteta effect, but they're seeing a huge second fan base coming out of Spain, where they're beginning to map second fan revenue of how do we capture the attention of these Spanish fans who have a core team they support locally, but are also open to following a second team, which is quite big in the Spanish league, especially within the Premier League. So they're devising whole strategy to consider how do we take that brand and penetrate that market across the Spanish region there. But really, the whole kind of premise and the frame of this is that borders are shooting down. Right, it no longer does content of film have to be produced in Hollywood for it to be a success or for it to be accessed. We're seeing how kind of influencers are impacting that, and this kind of content and the way that kids and families are interacting is becoming really fluid. Um, just to add, I guess right now we're kind of going through how why we see it as this great opportunity, but why is it a challenge? Because with the opportunity comes, well, how do we ensure that we're able um, to play a part and capture some of that revenue that is being influenced? Um, and this really starts to show just how fragmented it can be and how we need to be really intentful with our strategies. We see here that, as I mentioned earlier, we're seeing that just over 40 hours um, is the average time a child spends engaging with media. Over half of that, and we have seen it diminish, it still sits across YouTube. And half of us seeing that as a daily activity is being on or interacting with YouTube. But the scary stat is that around 500 new digital platforms each year are launching, and how do they target and communicate um, across that kids landscape and ecosystem? We see it even when we think of where and how do we begin to position ourselves to capture the awareness of kids. What media platforms are they using? We see that it's so fragmented across regions. Snapchat is still a huge component in media across France, but it would appear quite low as a UK used media platform. We're seeing Facebook from a parent's perspective still one of the most used platforms, not for social interactions, but it's where all of their club information sits. So sports clubs for their kids still sit in these group communities on Facebook. So it's still a heavily used media platform, albeit if you began to look at what platforms are you engaging with for social interaction or media consumption, on that kind of data, it would appear quite low. But when we consider the actual usage, it still sits up there as one of the top five platforms across nearly all of those regions. So a great platform to think, how do we begin to consider capturing that attention? So if we then just dial into YouTube for a moment as a how do we think that we could approach this um, attention play? What we look at, let's look at some of the data of this kind of how are they shaping the attitudes and views. So we're seeing that 16% of influencers have had an impact via their through social media. 15% of what they watched actually comes from word of mouth. So we see this family, friends, and influencers piece. I'll come back to in a moment. Online media still plays its part in how that influences a kid's attitude and beliefs. But what we do know is that offline channels sits lower than that, which is unsurprising. But I'd like to just focus on the word of mouth piece for a moment, because that's an area that we really see shift when we look at this, the kid space, and when we're all competing for the attention. If we look at the age groups and how that changes and evolves through those ages, we really see it move from it being heavily parent influenced at a younger age. We then move into being far more peer influenced as we begin to enter our school lives and what we talk about on the playground and our peers are getting into and enjoying. Within there as well, siblings plays a really, really big part. Um, and then as you then carry on and your digital life begins to expand and grow, that's where that online point begins to come in, and your attitudes are heavily then influenced, deteriorates from a parental play, still retains peers, but digital and kind of online behavior really begins to play its part. At this point, I guess I'd love to hear, Simon, from you. Have you got an age category that is your main focus here, or do you kind of
No,
a
I like
broad
to.
category?
Yeah, I mean, we what we have noticed is that for our products historically, it's still like the Facebook moms
Hmm.
is the main one. So you know, we did do TikTok, but we're not particularly big on TikTok, for example, which my kids are pushing that more, but that never really took off for us because I don't think it's done as well for the actual people who buy. So it's them or the grandparents. Um, we're still we do all ranges, but yes, I definitely see uh, the effect of the social media coming through on where kids are pushing, the parents to buy,
Yeah.
and we get hot products, and they can spike. Obviously, Wicked's out now, which is doing very well. So we're trying to catch the trends for what's coming through.
Yeah, interesting. It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's where does this begin, and it's really hard to evaluate the, we call it pester power, right? Of the pester of the parent to make the purchase. That is the data points and the sales data points that may be captured across Facebook. But where the origin of that could begin across other media platforms of where the kid becomes engaged and engrossed in the trends that are growing and scaling could quite often sit separately to where a kind of a direct interaction to purchase
We're in
begins
it,
to happen, right?
yeah, where the attribution comes through. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Cheryl, have you got a kind of audience focus from an age perspective that you see coming up there?
Yeah, generally the kids that we get coming into the park with the families are, well, we used to say under the age of 12. It's probably under the age of 10 now. Once they get a bit older than that, they're wanting to go off to theme parks. I'd say in terms of the child influence over parents, where we see it most is probably in the gift shop, to be perfectly honest.
Mhm.
because there you can see how the trends kind of hit, and you can tell how the families come in and they will tell the kids how much money they've got, and they've been good all day, so they can go and do that. So that's where we actually see it. Online, it's much harder to tell because in terms of trackability through sales and things like that, we've always assumed that the children have a big influence. I mean, for the past 15 years, that's not actually changed. It's usually the mother that we found in our research that makes the ultimate decision as to where they go on their day out. But the kids tend to have an influence, and quite often the mother will give them a palette of choice rather than a carte blanche as to where do you fancy going today. So that they will come up with a sort of 2 or 3 options, so maybe here or maybe there. So that's kind of the patterns of behaviour we've seen. In terms of social media, we use TikTok, Insta, Facebook. We've got stuff on YouTube, so we do spread it around a bit, and you do see the real sort of little trend things, particularly on TikTok. I mean, put a picture of a capybara on, and they love it.
Yeah.
How many tickets that sells you at the end of the day, I'm not sure, but definitely you can see these patterns that you're talking about.
Yeah, great. And I think it comes down to that at what point, when we consider the funnel of we've got to make sure we look at awareness. Awareness drives interest, that drives desire, that then drives action. And the influence part of a child at every point there, it's, well, how do they begin to have an influence? And it does come into one, the where you are for a certain age. And I think, as we were saying there, that under 10s is definitely still heavily parents influenced, although they're beginning, you begin to see from about 6 to 7 onwards, that's when that peer interaction really starts to play a much bigger part, and become influences their desires of what their interests might be. So one play is, well, how do we begin to think earlier at the funnel to ensure that the attention is being captured, that ultimately drives some pester power that drives, well, where do we then need to be to drive a purchase? There's probably breaking that funnel out and thinking, if we're going to compete and capture the attention, we've got it needs a slightly different strategy to the end purchase, which probably then needs to consider, based on age group yours there, is how do we put that in front of the parent, as you've said. Kevin, from a health supplement perspective, have you moved into the kids space yet for kind of kids supplements, or not yet?
So we have 2 different products. We have a junior product which is aimed at the 4 to 12, and then we have a teenage product which is 12 to 16. And again, traditionally, most of our sales are done by probably kind of parents in the pharmacy or the health food store.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So the purchase, so like I'm just blown away by the stat, 54% YouTube. I'm just like, we wouldn't traditionally, we're going after influencers who would be parents. Again, because we do a health supplement, we have to be very careful, with child promoting the product. So we've never done that to this stage. But I'm just blown away by the stats, as in and how much influence a child has. We would have, when we launched the product probably 7 or 8 years ago, one of the feedbacks was, at the time, we wanted to be kind of probably an all natural and unflavored product. But what we found was, children, just by their very nature, they didn't really, it looked, colorless, and they wanted to have what's the same as their parents, different product, but ultimately they wanted something orange and things that. Now, flavor is a very, very important part of the process. So we brought out a kind of flavored version of it about a year ago, but we haven't seen a massive increase in it. So it's interesting. We just assumed, oh, look, if we flavor it, they'll like it. You know what I mean? And we said, oh, like we were stagnating our sales because it was an unflavored, and you were nearly forcing them to take it. So yeah, I'm just intrigued just by the stats there, kind of how big YouTube is, how big kind of social media is. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
again, for us, like I would never have thought, but I see it in an overall. If we're trying to move people from junior to teen and then to a kind of 20 to 30 product, you know what I mean? If we can infiltrate them earlier in their life cycle, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But geez, yeah, I'm just blown away by how much influence they have over the
It's
parents, as we
huge,
would.
right?
Yeah.
It's massive, and I think this is where how what that influence means is the bit that we're going to kind of come onto there. Of, well, actually, how do we then look at look at data to consider, or, one, you either use it to spot white spaces and think, well, where does the opportunity sit? Or quite often we say our clients, especially in today's market, see it more as, well, what can data tell us that helps me de-risk a strategy? What helps me prove out my hypothesis that means that when we invest, we feel more comfortable that we're going to be getting some sort of return against that. So I'm going to come on to that in a moment. Really interesting, Kevin. Maybe it's a chat for us afterwards, as I've had a few conversations with the guys over at Tonic that have seemed to have steamrolled that kind of health space lately, based out of London with some of their products. So probably some interesting stories there. So really, in summary, we've got this fantastic opportunity with this market, and we trust that we all believe that, as we all have a level of focus against this kid space. But it's fiercely contested when we think, well, where does their attention sit? And we know that the start of a funnel to drive that pester power or to drive an interest into an outcome or an action, we need to first capture the attention, and that is across these categories, platforms, influencers. Just general life is kind of busy for a family nowadays. So this is where I begin to look at, okay, traditional strategies don't always help you get chosen. A lot of our customers rely or have relied on gut instinct. I know that happens a huge amount. But in such a fast-paced, evolving, trending world, so when you mentioned the trends on yours, they can come and go so quickly. It's ensuring that you're positioned to be intentional, but also able to then capitalize and move. One of those areas that we see play such a massive part is when we then consider partnerships. So partnerships, for my world, tends to sit across the usual license approach, Simon, which you'll be very, very up to date with, of what are the kind of IPs or characters that we can consider to partner with that may actually allow us to lean on the attention or the trust that another brand or IP has. So what we then see is across this partnership, we've got 85% of kids have or intend to purchase a product that is then related to a TV show or film. So there's a huge play here when we consider how partnerships can play a role in leaning on some of that trust or the attention that has already been built. Kevin, for you, what I then begin to look at is if we consider that it may be a route to consider partnerships, and that's where you see, we already see that in the space, right? You can walk through Tesco and see a Toy Story, Woody on a kid supplement somewhere. The layers to that become: do you go as far to say that we lean on the IP itself, or do we begin to look at trends across the space? So right now, Cheryl, the good news is that it's animals are trending so heavily right now across the age group, when you consider the kind of content and the kind of characters they're interacting with, how the growth of Bluey, the growth of Paw Patrol, Peppa Pig, animals community is really what is attracting kids' attention at a certain age. So when we begin to look at the data, I mean, you might begin to look at, you've got an IP route that might take you down the pathway of, do we want to get Peppa Pig on the supplement bottle, option A, or do we want to look at actually, yes, you've gone as far to say taste and color, but should we be shaping these as a lion or a X or whatever it might be? And does the shape of what they're consuming, could that play a really interesting part, as we can lean on the trust and the attention that's being already created across the animal space, for example? Does that make sense about how these different areas like attention and interest, how we can begin to lean on some of those other partnerships?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's just kind of that thing of trying to trigger something in their heads.
Yeah. So this is where I'll share some watch outs. So data is great. Clearly, I'm marginally biased when it comes to how important I feel data is. It's perfect for how we can use to shape the products, shape the content. How do we consider emerging markets for us? Data is obviously critical there. that partnership bit, that how do we earn that trust quickly, or we can begin to lean on the trust that somebody else has captured or developed, or a category has already developed in that example of the animal and the community push that we're seeing coming through right now. But all of this says that the first thing is, how do we know that audience? Now, I'll share some watchouts because not all data should be treated as equal. You've got this split, and this is where the research world, the project-led world, I would just say be cautious of in the kids space, because a single point in time is moving and shifting so quickly. It can depend on the time of year you do it. Is it during a back to school period? Is it during Christmas, summer, and Easter's? Or is it that that at that point in time there's a really hot trend that circulated? So I would always consider how you look at either always on data points, or always try, if you can, try and get linear context to it. So this is where it is right now. Where was this 6 months ago, 12 months ago? And if you can even look at that from a sales data perspective, or whatever data access points you have, that would de-risk this kind of scenario here. And I presented this at a Christmas toy show, and we looked at what do we think we should be investing in this year, in what category of toy should we be considering, or Simon, for you, what do we think we should be putting on our apparel? And construction toys was leading the charge here. When you begin to then map the previous contextual data to this, in actual fact, a lot of these were they were on a downward trajectory at this point, for the interaction within kids. And the actual opportunity that you wouldn't have said toys might have been a de-risking play here. But actually, when we consider that toy vehicles here, that is the moment that we should be considering there's an interesting trend here. How do I begin to consider how toy vehicles or vehicles can impact my marketing strategy or my product decisions? So what I'm trying to show and highlight here, I guess, is this snapshot in time is great to take a data point. Just be cautious as you begin to map that to your strategy. Is it a point in time, and which way is it going? Because by the time you've got something to market, especially if you're considering product development, these things can take time to get on shelf. Subject to that, you might actually have your market and your potential ability to capture that attention might have begun to diminish. The other watch out there, I guess this is where we begin to look at AI, which I think AI or the large language models. I think AI kind of blurs the lines a little bit for me, as I think language models have been around for a long, long time, and there's a really fantastic way that you can utilize those. But I think we're in this world now where decisions are beginning to be influenced by people's use of AI. And the data that feeds those is going to have a massive determination on the quality and the output of those decisions. So I think on the one side here, we've got this great lure of AI and research, which allows us to process vast amounts of volume. It can identify patterns. It can test hypotheses. You can even simulate responses now. I'm not sure whether you've heard, but always double check about data sources, because there's a lot of synthetic audiences been established, which is taking historical data to build a synthetic audience to run research against. So, and ultimately, you're not getting the true answer of a participant at that point. You're getting the perceived answer of an audience that has been created. If that makes sense. So for all its great plus points, there are risks that then sit around the privacy laws around kids. Is just be cautious, because language models don't scrape data when it links to kids. So access to data becomes quite limited, which at times can then create these synthetic outputs where it's not always based upon fact, but they've already jumped to their own hypotheses. If you're looking at some of the ChatGPT stories that have come out of late, we know that it can kind of reflect if it picks up some of those sources. Are they skewed? How does the data sit from there? And then, as always, we know that anyone who has used it, it sounds confident. but we need to make sure that data source feeds into this. I'm an advocate of where AI is going and what it can do for us of the future and the now. But my watch out, if any of you are already leaning into it, is just be really, really just understand the data source that is feeding it and make sure that it's not scraping news article stories as its data source, that who knows how factual or fundamentally accurate that might begin to be. Is anybody utilizing AI from their kind of strategy perspective or using it to feed into strategy at the moment? I'd be interested to know if you are, how, or anything you've experienced. Is that people aren't using it for that at the moment? Is that
I can't talk about the marketing side. I'm afraid it's not my area. So there may be
no,
something there, but we're not using it on the
No.
operation. So
We're similar. We're not using much of AI, kind of definitely not in the kind of junior market.
no good.
No, not us.
Good. Well, I think that's the as that begins to evolve, and over the next 12 months, it might be something you see. Just keeping your mind there of what impacts the outputs from AI is data. And it sounds really, really obvious, but it can become it can project things so confidently. So just be cautious as we begin to move into the AI world of where data is feeding from into that. And then finally, this last little watch out here is really, it is a specialized space. It's highly nuanced and protected. But in order to evaluate it, take a view across multiple areas here. So ensure that things move quickly, but media habits and where they're spending their time would be a place to evaluate. Not necessarily considering, and this is the difficult part, right? Of how your marketing attribution models. What do you attribute to the awareness that drives tester power, that drives a purchase? It is likely that your data will be pointing at two different areas. That one, can we confirm that we're capturing the right level of attention? And how are we capturing attention, as we said, could be through partnership, content types, where we're sharing it. That ensures your attention economy is good. You then also need that second strategy to consider, well, if that is at certain ages, and Cheryl, your age is at there, that is largely been driven from that pestering of the parent. So ultimately, do we need to be in two places? Do we need to, what is our messaging to parent to ensure that we can capitalize on hopefully the attention that we could be capturing from the kids directly? So really, what we've gone through, I'm going to kind of wrap up and make sure that there's plenty of time if anyone wants to dig in and interrogate me on any other questions. But we've kind of summarized throughout, right, that this kids economy, it's a massive growth engine. It's a massive potential for especially everybody on this call. But attention has shifted and is shifting. So what is going on today becomes really, really important. So when you look at where you're going to invest into understanding, while research is fantastic and great, I would just consider sample size. I would consider moments in time. And if there are any ways that if you're looking at things like sales data, are you able to get the contextual back data that will help support the trend line that is beginning to move within that? I think Simon, for you, of all of us, the pace of those changes for you are going to be really, really significant, right? Can we be looking at something around K-pop Demon Hunters? It feels like that there's a huge potential right now.
Spot on. We have some stores as well, and it's flying out the stores at the minute. It's If you can catch the right trend, it's very, very important. The big thing, obviously, is the timeline to get the product in. That's the biggest challenge. Yeah, it's a very long lead time on purchase.
Well, I think on that one, it caught everybody by surprise, right? As Netflix didn't even have a follow-on plan which is why the next movie doesn't come out till 2029, I think I saw. So I think that one caught everyone by surprise a little bit.
Just slap a 6-7 on all your packaging. 2 stickers, 6-7.
I thought, yeah,
Yeah.
but as simple as that right now. And the other thing there is beginning to. So we looked at Bluey quite heavily with some of our customer base, and this is where you can begin to look at, if you have the right access points, of what's going on in other markets. When you have a global property like that, Bluey came out in Asia first of all, and it went on this great growth curve, and then began to dip off. And it's definitely it was reducing across those Asian markets quite significantly. Had a bit of a drop off, but we were still seeing it trend the same way in the UK. The UK then began to drop off just as the US was beginning to rise. Now, if you took that data now, which was all the back data of that growth journey, they all went on nearly the exact same growth journey, just 4 or 5 months apart. So you can begin to actually look at, from a confidence perspective, what other data sources has this already happened or emerged? So you tend to see, we're quite good at, we tend to sit in the middle in the UK. We tend to very rarely kind of massive first mover advantage, where to see something coming east or west, and we're always like in the middle to the party. So begin actually to look at what other kind of global data might sit out there. It's always interesting to see, if you do have access to that, to think, has this attention already happened elsewhere, and how did that kind of play out? And then the last thing on here is just that proprietariness of insights. Just be cautious of how language models and what is going on in social is leaning on each other's stories versus fact. Is probably my biggest watch out, especially over the coming months and years, as we definitely do begin to enter more of a large language models world. I don't think it's going away. So just be super cautious of the data source that is feeding into any of those that you do begin to use. So that is me. Hopefully, it was interesting and sparked some thought and debate. I'm very happy to fly into any questions. And if there's anything else you need, we've got a bunch of articles that are on the site that you might find interesting around any of this. The purchase power, the attention economy. Then feel free. They're all free reports and content pieces to go and download, or you can drop me a note and I can send anything specific across to you. But I'll open the floor for anything you'd like to question me on, or even interrogate. Maybe things in your industry, in your kind of category industries that I've seen.
My one sort of touches on what you'd said before. As you say, it's very difficult to do the attribute for the kid when it may be through the mom's Facebook account, say, is go through it. So, do you think those methods have got more sophisticated recently with the AI in terms of doing that? I mean, it'd just be interesting how that attribution is being done.
I think right now, unfortunately, that there is, because of the way that the compliance works, is rightly so. There is ultimately two attribution funnels going on, and that the connection of being able to drive between attention and purchase. I don't see that changing anytime soon in the kids space. I think we can understand, are we winning in the attention world, and how do we win attention and capture of attention? Will sort of foreseeable future sit separately to the actual attribution of a sale or of revenue, purely on the basis that the compliance of tracking. There is nothing that sits across the kid space in there that, like, you can do across parents, and you can track that journey all the way through.
Tom, just on kind of your 22 markets, is the UK your main market that you're pulling your data from? You said you have 3 million families. Is the UK, how much of that overall would that make up of the 3 million?
No, so we have full parity across all markets. Interestingly, apart from Ireland, which we launched last year, but as a smaller market, has slightly smaller sample size. So we speak to 400 kids and 200 parents every single week in 21 of those markets. We speak to 200 kids and 200 parents in Ireland, just from a size perspective.
And is there any anomalies between maybe kind of say, I would normally put Ireland and UK together, but is there anything else in one of your other, have you US as part of those 22, is it? Is there any?
Yeah, so we go US, so across Europe, so UK, Ireland, then the EU5 of your Germany, France, Spain, Italy, Poland, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, across different Asia markets from China, Japan, Australia, then with the US, from US, Canada, Mexico, Brazil. They're the markets that we're in, and there is definite local nuance that is important to consider. Not all trends trend at the same pace or time. In those markets.
Thanks.
While you're on that, we're looking to do more in the UAE, MENA in general. Okay. We're often told to look at our EU business in terms of understanding potential there. What do you think stands out? Is there any particular hot characters at the minute in the UAE?
It's interesting to look at the other markets. UAE, we're seeing a very strong evergreen presence. So your Minions and your SpongeBobs, the ones that are never people's absolute favorites, but never seem to drop out the top 10. They don't seem to be as quick on certain trends in that market at the moment, although that's always changing and shifting. There's there is a heavy European influence that floods into that. But across the data, we are seeing it's quite similar to the Latin markets in that sense, actually, that due to some of the margins and sales potential, actually looking at evergreen properties is a good strategy in those areas. And they do seem to be jumping on the Harry Potter bandwagon at the moment as well, Simon, with the new series coming out. That seems to be gathering traction as more and more gets released about the actors and who's playing what and the filming of it, etc. Any more questions or anything anyone would like to quiz me on?
No, that was all very interesting. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. It was brilliant.
Yeah. It's very interesting. Like, we make ready meals, and it's mostly individual portions that are not necessarily targeted on any age group, but in particular, but more so the kind of the individual person. So, but whether it's older or whether it's young single people or older people that kind of have an empty home type household, and then obviously the people that are can bring their lunch to work and things like that. So it's not really targeted as a kid's product, but when you think about the influence that the kids have, like the on the shopping and eating out, that those numbers are huge. Like it was just the fact, and when you think about it, it totally makes sense. You talk about going out for dinner on a Saturday evening, and the kids are like, "Oh, I don't want to go there. Their mashed potatoes are lumpy." So yeah. They have a huge influence when you actually think about it. But those numbers are insane. So it is definitely an opportunity to bring the kids into advertising, even though they're not necessarily the target consumer. Yeah, and then I suppose the struggle is keeping their attention, like as you say, that they move so quickly on trends. Like, as I say, that whole 6-7, anybody who has children will understand what that is. Well, nobody understands what it is.
Yeah, nothing. I was about to say. Yeah,
it's nothing. But like, you can't even say the word. The number is 6-7 anymore, without somebody in the background going 6-7. And but that'll run out in a month, and it'll be something else, and it's just constantly changing. So it's hard to keep on top of the kids' trends and minds. But as you said, you can always kind of go back to the old reliables, the Minions and the Harry Potters, and things like that. So yeah, very, very interesting.
Yeah, that's something we speak to our customers a lot about. Of you've almost got this, like when you look at the rankings, and we've got a new score launching at the end of this year, which right now we do a lot of favorite rankings. So we look at what's trending as kids' favorite character or toy right now in that space. And that always fluctuates because it's an absolute, right? A favorite does change in a child's life. What we then look at is we take favorites, but then we also look engaged with. So we're having a new score release. Haven't gone through any marketing yet, so IP engagement score is not how it will release next year. We'll have a better name than that. But what that begins to look at is, whilst favorite is great, you get those trends, especially across the partnership world. You want to know that the kids are engaging with it. So are they going on to purchase a product linked to it? So are they purchasing a licensed product? Are they streaming? Are they going to a live experience? Are they going to the cinema? All of this gets scored in our data. And then you get this weighted ranking of the most engaged IPs. And we've been tracking it for a little while to test the methodology. And you get the kind of like top 3 fluctuations, but it's really interesting to see this solid, and I say the word evergreen because that's the phrase that all of my clients have used, properties that sit as really strong strategies to lean on the trust, with Harry Potter being one of those. Superman, in a time where we've had this huge superhero fatigue, has been a thing for the last 12, 18 months of kids actually being turned off by superheroes, but it was done so much. You then actually saw Superman buck all those trends, have come back and actually be. And we did some research into why, and he's the OG superhero, so he managed to buck all the trends of superhero fatigue, of your Thors and Avengers dipping with every kind of release. But actually looking at that engagement metric across there, Evergreen's a really good place if you're not doing as much IP. Your Minions, your SpongeBob's are really kind of great places to be. And the category as well, like I was saying to you, Kevin, of consider the category of trend is the Bluey, the Peppa Pigs, and the Paw Patrols. The theme that the category and the theme that wraps all those is animals, friendly animals, community. It's an interesting category to track and see. It's continued to, there's new kittens, Rubble and Crew, the construction pups. It keeps going, this kind of world of animals right now, which is probably music to your ears, Cheryl. There's something to play on for sure. Well, we are at time. I'm happy to hold if anyone's got any further questions, or let everybody get back to their Thursdays.
No, thank you very much.
I have to go.
Thanks,
Thank you
guys.
very much.
Thank you very much.
We'll put the recording on Scale, and also the slides for anybody that'd like to share with colleagues. And I'm sure Tom will be delighted to chat to any of you if you have any follow-up questions that come to mind in the next couple of days.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Cheers. Bye-bye.
It was interesting. I didn't know about